Luke 23. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up all the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here." On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressed him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I've examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he's done nothing to deserve death. Therefore I will punish him and then release him." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!" Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they had asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it's dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he's God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. So the first thing that comes to mind is the veil being cut in two, the curtain being cut in two, and this was the curtain that blocked off the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was the part of the tabernacle or the temple in which the Ark of the Covenant was held, and the presence of God was understood to be in the Ark of the Covenant. The only one who was allowed in that room was the high priest, and he would go in there once a year to make atonement for the people. But now Jesus had made atonement, and if you observe the Day of Atonement, or at least if you've read about the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 23, and I highly recommend that you observe the Day of Atonement. I mean, it's an extremely important holy day to God. In fact, he specifically says that if anyone will not withhold from themselves on that day, that they will die. I feel like a lot of us are not taking this seriously. You know, like we're not taking his Sabbath seriously. We're not taking his holy days seriously. But his words are very serious about that. Like we've somehow just continued to live in these counterfeit Christian ideas that we can just keep spurning God and he'll just forgive us. You know, we'll just chuck that into the pile of things that he's going to cover for us, right? And that's ridiculous. In any event, the Day of Atonement, everyone is supposed to withhold from themselves while the high priest is making atonement. But this is an everlasting covenant. This is a day that all of us are supposed to be observing every year. It's not because it's fulfilled, oh, Jesus fulfilled that, we don't observe it anymore. No, the word says it's an everlasting, from generation to generation, and you are to teach your children about it. If you haven't been doing that, do it this year, because the holy days are coming up, so you need to start studying them. So having observed the Day of Atonement, I know that we're supposed to be withholding from ourselves, and we're supposed to be having reverence for the atonement that was being made for us at the time, or the atonement that has been made for us now. Now, Jesus was making a different kind of atonement. The human high priest could not cover us with that atonement in the way that Jesus has covered us. So there was this separation between us and God, between us and the presence of God. But when Jesus died, that separation was torn in two. That curtain was torn in two. There was also an earthquake, and the light went out. It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. So what is this? Verse 44. It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until about 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. So he passed at about noon, and for 3 hours there was no light. I'm still sort of discerning this, and still kind of discerning also this pattern that God establishes, such as in the fourth trumpet. And I'm inclined to believe that this has to do with the light of God. You know, just as he tells people in John that the light is going to be with you for a little while longer. Walk in the light while you can, so the darkness will not overtake you. So I'm inclined to believe that it's symbolic of that, but I also kind of feel like there's something more that I just don't know yet. If God has revealed something to any of you, please let me know. But it's interesting because I also, you know, in the fourth trumpet, we know that the witnesses die after the fourth trumpet. So I would have thought the same thing about the fourth trumpet, where it says, you know, a third of the light, a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark, and a third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. If that happened after the witnesses were killed, then I would also think, okay, the light of the world has left. So I think there's more about this that is yet to be revealed to me. The reason I'm reading the Gospels is, of course, because God had told me to read them when I was taking up my grievances with him about what it is that I'm experiencing here, so that I could be encouraged, so that I could have an example, and so that I could pursue his heart. These, to be honest, these chapters that talk about the very end when Jesus is being persecuted are really hard for me to read. They bring me a lot of pain. Like, I feel such pain and such grief when I think about what he went through, and I feel like his humble, tender spirit. So a lot of times when I'm reading it, I have to pause it several times because it's so painful for me. It just really hits me the ways that he was persecuted by those he came to save, the way he was mocked and ridiculed. So that's usually what I'm feeling, and I'm sitting here thinking, okay, how am I supposed to understand like what it is that I'm going through or what I'm going to go through? You know, part of what I think is like him being shuffled from Pilate to Herod. I think about like just the agonizing journey from Pilate to Herod, and then back to Pilate. How he must have been treated. What was he feeling? That feels like an eternity. And I think about what he told the church in Smyrna about how they're going to be jailed for 10 days and they're going to suffer persecution and stay strong even to the point of death. And there's no way for me to prepare for that. There's no way for me to know what that's going to be like except to prepare in him. He's the only one who can prepare me for any of that. I can't even sit here and look at what he went through and think, okay, so how do I prepare my heart? It's got to be in him. I just have to be submitted to him. I just have to know, you know, and the example that he set is that he persevered knowing the joy that was set before him, not knowing what it was going to be, but trusting in the joy that the Father has planned. That's the only thing that I can continuously take, is to trust in that, to believe in what I don't see and I don't know, but I have been promised in this covenant, to just keep holding out for that. And I think also that by the time this happens, I'm going to be so glad it's almost over. I really am. I'm going to be so glad that it's almost over. So grateful that he chose me to do what I'm doing right now, that he's bestowed on me a crown of honor if I make it there, which I'm going to make it there. I am determined to make it there. One of the other things that I feel as I'm reading this, as I'm kind of scrolling through, is I have that feeling quite frequently of reflecting on everything that I went through as he was healing me, writing that book and having him build every page in me. It wasn't just a matter of like, you know, sitting down and writing. It was he built every page in me. He was also bringing Babylon out of me as I was writing that book. No one will ever know. No one will ever know what I went through to write those books. And I woke up this morning to a really beautiful message from one of the sisters on the channel telling me how Heart Note series is affecting her, how God is testifying to it in her life, how she had been through 27 years of therapy and psychology never worked. It was coddling, causing us to, hide out in our diagnoses and this sort of thing. And it really blessed me because the majority of the time I sit here and I'm like, have I spent my strength in vain? Because truly there are so few people who can actually hear, who actually love him and are doing the work. So many people who are entertaining themselves with these videos, but so few who are actually doing the work. And it just blows me away. It honestly blows me away. When he says many are called but few are chosen, he is not kidding. There are so few who will actually do the work. And so I think about him coming here and pouring out his life to minister, to teach, to set an example, and then be a sacrifice on the cross, the sacrifice on the cross. And I wonder how he felt. Like, this is so massive what he was doing. And I feel that what I've done is a big deal. What I'm doing each day and what I've given up, I feel like that's a really big deal. It's my entire life. I can only imagine how he felt seeing people totally reject what he came here to do for them, calling for Barabbas to be released from prison, shouting, kill him, crucify him, rejecting him completely. I can't even imagine what he felt or what he was wondering or like, how did he comfort himself? Because sometimes that's difficult. But I also hold on to that promise. I know what God has built in me. I know what he's had me do. Even if I don't see the fruit of it while I'm still here, I know he's going to do something with what he's had me do, with the sacrifice that I offer up to him. So that's something else that I find, I'm trying to think of the word, comfort, solace, and also that I'm not, I can realize that his sacrifice was so much more. And if anything, this helps me to understand his sacrifice. It helps me to understand what I need to go through in order to appreciate his sacrifice. So those are my thoughts tonight on this. That's what I'm getting from this. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Please let me know if there's anything that you get from this chapter. I'll see you in the next video.